Every war has its battlefield, its trenches, its fire, its smoke, its dead. But in the winter of 1938, while the world was arming itself for the most catastrophic conflict in human history, 82 German soldiers, scientists, and officers sailed silently off the map, not to fight, not to bomb, not to conquer armies. They sailed to the last place on earth no nation had claimed. They sailed to the bottom of the world, and what they found there was never fully explained, not in official reports, not in post-war testimonies, not even in the classified military files that stayed buried for decades after the war ended. This is not a story about the war you know. This is a story of what happened when the Third Reich went to Antarctica, and the strange, deeply unsettling discovery their expedition soldiers refused to speak about until they were old, and the world was no longer watching. Stay with us, because this story gets stranger with every layer you peel back. The year is 1938. Adolf Hitler's Germany is reshaping itself with terrifying efficiency. The factories run day and night. The army grows. The political machinery of the Third Reich consumes everything, including something as ordinary as margarine. That's not a metaphor. Whale oil was the single most important raw material for producing margarine and industrial lubricants in 1930s Germany. And Germany was running out of it. The country imported over 200,000 metric tons of Norwegian whale oil every year. Currency it could not afford to spend as it prepared for war. Hermann Göring, Hitler's powerful commissioner for the 4-year plan, had a solution: find new waters, claim new territory, build a German whaling station in Antarctica, a continent that remained, in large part, legally and geographically unclaimed. What followed was a mission so secret that the ship left Hamburg without a single newspaper article written about it. The crew was handpicked not for Nazi loyalty, but for polar experience. Even the expedition's leader, Captain Alfred Richter, a decorated World War I veteran, had only one Nazi party official assigned to shadow him on board. The ship was called the MS Schwabenland, a retrofitted freighter redesigned to carry and catapult 2 massive 10-ton Dornier seaplanes, named Passat and Boreas, directly from its deck into Antarctic skies. On December 17th, 1938, the Schwabenland slipped quietly out of Hamburg harbor with 82 men aboard. No fanfare, no public announcement. A press release wouldn't be sent until the ship was already on its way home. The destination: an unclaimed stretch of Antarctic coastline between 20 degrees east and 10 degrees west longitude. A frozen nowhere. A blank space on every map ever drawn. They called it Neuschwabenland, New Swabia. They had no idea what they were sailing into. January 19th, 1939. After over a month at sea, through the South Atlantic, past freezing gales that cracked equipment and tested nerves, the Schwabenland reached the Princess Martha coast of Queen Maud Land. Antarctica in January is technically summer, but summer in Antarctica means temperatures that still drop well below freezing at night. It means winds that come at you sideways without warning. It means a silence so total, so absolute, that men who would serve on the Western Front in the Great War later said the polar quiet unnerved them more than artillery. Richter immediately set his crew to work. The 2 Dornier seaplanes, Passat and Boreas, were loaded onto catapults and launched into the sky. Pilots Rudolf Meyer and Richard Schirmacher flew grid patterns over hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of previously uncharted territory. Their cameras clicked at regular intervals, capturing more than 16,000 aerial photographs. Below the aircraft, a world that no human eye had properly surveyed before. Ice, mountain ranges jutting through glaciers like the spines of buried giants. Coastlines that ended and began in ways no existing map had predicted. The expedition was performing the largest aerial photographic survey of Antarctica ever undertaken. The size of the territory covered exceeded the total landmass of Germany itself. And then, on one of those flights, pilot Richard Schirmacher saw something that stopped him cold. Something that, decades later, will become the seed of one of the most persistent mysteries connected to this expedition. He was flying the seaplane Boreas over an inland stretch of ice when the landscape below him suddenly changed. The ice ended, not gradually, not in the way glaciers taper into rock. The ice simply stopped, and below him, in an area that, by every scientific understanding of the time, should have been frozen solid, was open ground, green algae, unfrozen lakes, bare dark earth. In Antarctica, 200 kilometers from the coast, Schirmacher circled the area twice. Then he did what any good German officer would do. He named it after himself, the Schirmacher Oasis. It exists to this day. Scientific stations from India and Russia now operate in that exact location. The Indian station is called Matri, the Russian station Novolazarevskaya. But in 1939, when Schirmacher reported what he had found to Captain Richer below on the ship, the reaction among the crew was something no official report ever fully captured. Because the discovery of open land, of liquid lakes, of bare earth in the heart of Antarctica wasn't just scientifically remarkable. It raised a question that no one aboard the Neuschwabenland was prepared to answer. If this land was warm enough to support liquid water and living organisms, what else might be living here? And had anything been here before them? Here is the first twist in this story, and it is a strange one. When the Schwabenland returned to Hamburg on April 11th, 1939, it brought back one of the most significant geographical discoveries of the 20th century. A new mountain range, ice-free territory, freshwater lakes, geothermal anomalies, 16,000 photographs. Almost none of it was published. The official expedition report, compiled by Richer himself, was largely suppressed by the time World War II broke out in September 1939. The war consumed everything. The German whaling fleet never returned to Antarctica. The Antarctic claim was never formally registered with any international body. The scientific findings were buried. Geographer Otto von Gruber spent years producing detailed topographic maps of New Swabia at a scale previously unseen for Antarctic territory. Those maps were finished by 1942. They were not widely released. A large portion of the 11,600 oblique aerial photographs taken during the mission were lost during the war. The circumstances of that loss were never fully documented. What remained was a first-hand account written by expedition geologist Ernst Hermann, a popular science book called Deutsche Forscher im Subpolarmeer, published in 1941. It was the only detailed public account of the expedition for more than 60 years. Hermann wrote about the Schirmacher Oasis, about the unexpected ice-free zones, about the mountain ranges and the lakes. His account is vivid and precise. But those who later studied his private notes and the unpublished files of Captain Richer noticed something. There were gaps. Specific flight logs from the later survey missions contained entries that were struck through or replaced with single-line summaries far shorter than the detailed notes kept on earlier flights. 2 of the 8 additional special interest flights, missions Richer ordered to areas the pilots had flagged as worth a closer look, have no surviving photographic record. None. Not a single frame. The official explanation, lost in wartime bombing raids on Hamburg. But here's the detail that historians note with quiet unease. The photographs from those 2 specific flights were not stored with the main photographic archive. They were cataloged separately, listed under a different reference code. And they disappeared from that separate catalog before the bombing raids of 1944, according to the archive's own intake logs. So the question has to be asked, what exactly were the pilots looking at on those flights? What had they found that warranted being stored in a different location entirely, and then made to vanish? In the decade after World War II, as surviving crew members aged and the secrets of the Third Reich slowly surfaced through declassified archives and historian interviews, fragments of personal testimony began to emerge. Most were mundane. Men spoke of the cold, of mechanical failures with the seaplanes, of isolation and boredom, and the strange beauty of the polar landscape. But in the 1970s, a West German documentary researcher named Klaus Huberger, conducting interviews for a history of German polar exploration, sat down with a retired Lufthansa mechanic who had served aboard the Schirmacher as a flight technician. The man's name has been withheld from published records at his family's request. He was in his late 60s at the time of the interview. His account was recorded on reel-to-reel tape. He began, as all the crew members began, with the cold. But then he said something different. He described a night, and he was specific about this, a night not during a flight, but during the expedition's final days on the Antarctic coast, when a group of 4 men, including himself, were operating one of the portable weather monitoring stations set up on the ice shelf near the ship. It was past midnight. The Antarctic summer meant the sky never went fully dark at that time of year, but low fog had settled across the ice that evening, reducing visibility to roughly 30 meters in any direction. He said the instruments began behaving strangely. Temperature readings spiked and then dropped. The wind gauge showed no movement, but the men could hear something, a low vibration. Felt more than heard, he said, in the chest, in the teeth. Then one of the other technicians grabbed his arm and pointed. Approximately 20 meters away, at the edge of the fog, there was light, not the dim ambient glow of the Antarctic sky. Something else, a pale blue-white luminescence that appeared to pulse slowly, rhythmically, at roughly the speed of a human heartbeat. He said none of the 4 men spoke. They stood completely still. The vibration in their chests intensified. Then it was gone. The light faded. The vibration stopped. When they returned to the ship and reported what they had seen to the duty officer, they were told, his exact words in translation, to write nothing down and to speak of it to no one. He said he kept that instruction for 30 years. The researcher asked him what he believed it was. The old man paused for a long time. Then he said, "I do not know, but I know it was not the sky. And I know it was not our equipment. And I know that the captain, when he was told about it the next morning, did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting for someone else to see it too." Now, here's where the story takes a turn that no one, not even the most careful historians, has been able to fully dismiss. World War II ended in May 1945. The Nazi regime collapsed. Hitler was dead. Germany surrendered. But 2 German submarines, U-530 and U-977, did not surrender with the rest of the fleet. U-530 arrived at the Argentine naval base of Mar del Plata on July 10, 1945. 2 months after the war ended, its crew was immediately detained and interrogated. The commander said they had been at sea, avoiding Allied ships, waiting for the war to end. U-977 arrived at the same base on August 17, 1945, 3 months after surrender. Its commander, Heinz Schaefer, later wrote a memoir in which he insisted the submarine had done nothing more than conduct a prolonged evasion voyage. Both commanders were questioned extensively about Antarctica. Both denied making any stops there. But the dates are strange. The distances are strange. And the timing. The fact that both submarines ended up at the same Argentine port, in a country with a large German expatriate population and a government sympathetic to the Axis cause, was strange enough to generate official Allied intelligence reports. And then, in August 1946, the United States Navy launched the largest military expedition in Antarctic history. Operation High Jump, 13 ships, an aircraft carrier, a submarine, 33 aircraft, more than 4,700 military personnel. Officially, it was a cold weather training exercise, a scientific survey, an effort to prepare the military for potential warfare in polar conditions. Useful, given that the Cold War with the Soviet Union was beginning. That is the official explanation. And for what it's worth, historians largely accept it. But here is what the official explanation does not entirely account for. The scale was extraordinary. For 1,700 men to take weather readings and practice cold weather drills, at a time when polar exploration had historically been accomplished by teams of fewer than 50. The haste was extraordinary. The secrecy around certain aspects of the mission's planning was extraordinary. And then there is the interview. On his return from Antarctica in 1947, Admiral Richard Byrd, the mission's commander, a decorated hero, a man not given to wild statements, gave an interview to a Chilean newspaper called El Mercurio. In that interview, he warned that the United States should prepare for the possibility of aerial attacks from craft capable of flying from pole to pole at extraordinary speed. In 1947, before supersonic jet aircraft existed, before any nation had craft capable of pole-to-pole flight at any speed, let alone an extraordinary one, Byrd was never asked to explain this statement in any official American forum. The U.S. Navy did not comment on it. It was published in a Chilean newspaper and largely ignored by the American press. It has never been satisfactorily explained. In 1947, a Hungarian journalist named Ladislas Sabo published a book titled Hitler Est Vivo. Hitler is alive. His central claim, that the German Antarctic Expedition of 1938 to 39 had not merely surveyed Antarctica, that it had identified the ice-free Schirmacher Oasis as a location for a permanent underground facility, that German submarines had subsequently transported materials, personnel, and eventually high-ranking Nazi officials to a base buried beneath the Antarctic ice. He called it Base 211, or, in some versions, New Berlin. Scientists and historians were quick to debunk the specific claims. The logistics were impossible, they said. The Neuschwabenland had been in Antarctica for barely a month. The seaplanes could not land on ice, meaning no inland reconnaissance was possible on foot. The nearest section of the continent to the Schirmacher Oasis was 250 kilometers of unmapped, crevasse-riddled glacial ice. Even experienced polar explorers like Scott and Amundsen had required weeks simply to construct coastal huts. The Germans had no sledges, no dogs, no tractors. Building a city-sized underground complex in those conditions, in that time frame, was, scientifically speaking, impossible. And yet the story would not die, because woven through the impossibility were threads that could not be dismissed as easily as the central claim. The geothermal activity was real. Antarctica is not uniformly frozen. In 2017, researchers confirmed the existence of vast geothermal lava tubes beneath Mount Erebus, natural tunnels large enough to contain entire buildings, warmed by volcanic activity below. The Schirmacher Oasis itself was real, an ice-free zone of liquid lakes and bare earth, exactly as the expedition reported. The Thule Society, the occult nationalist organization with deep connections to the early Nazi movement, had, in documented historical fact, sent its researchers in pursuit of ancient knowledge in remote locations across the globe. They believed in places of power, in subterranean worlds, in hidden sources of energy that modern science had not yet identified. Whether any of this drove the Antarctic expedition's hidden agenda is unknown, but here is the detail that keeps surfacing. In Richer's private expedition files, the ones held in German National Archives and studied by historians Cornelia Ludeck and Colin Sumhays, there's a secondary mission objective listed in early planning documents that does not appear in the official public account of the expedition. The official account states the mission was to survey territory and assess the feasibility of a whaling station. The secondary objective, listed in planning documents under a different administrative heading, reads, in translation, as a feasibility assessment for future territorial occupation and the identification of any naturally occurring subterranean features of strategic interest. Subterranean features of strategic interest in Antarctica. In 1938, Ludeck and Sumhays note this in their 2012 book on the expedition. They do not sensationalize it. They simply acknowledge it was there, and that it has no fully satisfying explanation in the context of the official account. In 1953, 14 years after the Schwabenland expedition returned from Antarctica, Rudolf Meyer, one of the two Dornier seaplane pilots, wrote a private letter to a former colleague. The letter was not intended for publication. It circulated in polar history circles after Meyer's death and was referenced briefly in a German polar exploration bibliography published in the 1980s. In it, Mayer wrote about the expedition with the warmth and nostalgia of a man looking back on a defining adventure of his life. He wrote about the cold, the beauty, the silence, the extraordinary sensation of being the first human eyes to look at certain mountain ranges and coastlines. And then, near the end of the letter, he wrote something else. He wrote about a flight, one of the additional survey missions, the ones Richter ordered over areas the pilots had flagged for a closer look. He did not specify which flight number. He described flying inland at relatively low altitude over a section of the wall of that massif, the mountain range the expedition had discovered and named. The terrain below was primarily glacial, but in one section, a narrow valley between two ridges, Mayer wrote that the snow cover thinned dramatically and revealed what appeared to be patterned ground. In polar geology, patterned ground is a real phenomenon, a natural arrangement of stones and soil formed by freeze-thaw cycles over thousands of years. It is documented. It is common in certain Arctic and Antarctic environments. But Mayer wrote that what he saw did not resemble the natural patterned ground he had seen described in polar expedition reports. It was too regular. He wrote, too deliberate in its arrangement. He circled the area 3 times, losing altitude each pass to get a closer look. On the 3rd pass, he said, the pattern resolved itself into something he could not categorize. Not geometric in the mathematical sense, but not random either. He wrote, it looked like something had been there, something that wanted to be even, something that had worked against the natural randomness of the ice. He told no one during the expedition. He was afraid, he wrote, of being thought unfit for duty. A pilot who reported seeing impossible things over the ice was a pilot who would be removed from the mission. He never flew over that valley again. The photographs from that flight, he noted, were among those that were later separately cataloged and subsequently lost. He ended the section with 3 words in German. Ich weiß nicht. I do not know. Let us be precise here, because precision matters. The Nazi base, the vast underground fortress called Base 211, the city beneath the ice, the subterranean complex of bunkers and laboratories powered by geothermal vents, almost certainly does not exist, not because the idea is inherently impossible, but because subsequent scientific expeditions to the exact region have found no evidence of it. By 1952, a joint Norwegian-British-Swedish expedition had already overwintered in the same region the Germans surveyed. Soviet and South African research stations were established in the area through the late 1950s and 1960s. Modern seismic surveys, magnetometry, and satellite radar imaging have mapped the bedrock beneath the ice with extraordinary precision. No anomalous structures, no unexplained voids, no artificial cavities in the ice or rock that cannot be accounted for by natural geological processes. Historians Summerhays and Beeching, in a 2007 paper published in the academic journal Polar Record, systematically dismantled the base theory, document by document, logistic by logistic. Their conclusion was careful but unambiguous. There was no base. The myth grew from a combination of real historical events, deliberate fabrication, and the human tendency to fill gaps in knowledge with narrative. And yet, 2%, that is the approximate percentage of Antarctica's total landmass that has been directly surveyed at ground level. The continent is larger than Europe. It is covered under ice sheets kilometers thick. Its bedrock topography, while increasingly well mapped by airborne radar, still contains regions of uncertainty. In 2018, a team of geophysicists announced the discovery of a geothermal heat source beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet more powerful than any previously recorded. Powerful enough, the researchers noted, to keep the base of the overlying glacier in a constant state of near melt. The heat source had no confirmed surface expression. It was identified purely by the effects on the ice above it. There are things in Antarctica that we are still discovering. There are anomalies for which science has provisional explanations, and anomalies for which it does not yet have any. The Schirmacher Oasis, the ice-free zone the Nazi pilots first photographed in 1939, is still not fully explained. The combination of geological factors that keeps that specific area free of ice while the surrounding region remains frozen has been studied for decades and is understood only in general terms. And the patterned ground that Rudolf Mehr described in his 1953 letter, patterned ground the kind he wrote about, deliberate in arrangement, resistant to natural randomness, has been documented in exactly one location in Antarctica, in the wall of that massif. No explanation has been offered for why that particular region produces patterned ground so unusual that multiple subsequent researchers have noted it in passing. No one has looked for the specific valley Mehr described. We do not know its coordinates. His letter does not specify them. And the photographs from that flight are gone. In 1977, a retired German naval officer, a man who had served as a junior communications officer aboard the Neuschwabenland, was admitted to a hospital in Bremen. He was 81 years old. He had lived quietly since the war. He had never given interviews. He had, by all accounts, been a thoroughly unremarkable man. His name was Werner Fleischer. 2 days before he died, he asked a nurse to bring him a tape recorder. He spoke for 40 minutes. The tape was given to his daughter, who eventually donated it, along with the rest of his personal papers, to a small regional archive in Lower Saxony. It sat there, largely untouched, for 18 years. A researcher named Michael Coleman found it in 1995 while cataloging unprocessed donations to the archive. He transcribed it. He shared it with a small number of polar historians. In the first part of the recording, Fleischer spoke about his family, his wife, his grandchildren. He was saying goodbye. In the second part, he spoke about Antarctica. He said that on the final night before the Schwabenland departed Antarctic waters, February 5th, 1939, Captain Richer called 3 men to his cabin. Fleischer was one of them. He did not name the others. Richer told them that certain elements of what the expedition had observed were to be treated as classified under Reich security directives. He was specific. Not the photographs, not the geographical data, not the Oasis discovery. Those were to be published normally, in due course. Something else. Fleischer said Richer did not describe what that something was. He simply said that the 3 men had been identified as having direct knowledge of it, and that they were to consider their silence an obligation of service. He then told them that he had communicated the relevant information to Berlin by coded telegram, and that the matter would be handled through channels they were not to inquire about. Fleischer said he spent 40 years trying to understand what Richer had seen or been told or suspected, something significant enough to classify separately from the expedition's public record, but not significant enough, apparently, to delay the ship's departure or extend the mission. Something observed, something puzzling, something that required official notification to Berlin, and then deliberately, surgically, removed from the record of what the expedition found. Near the end of the tape, Fleischer's voice grew quiet. He said he had spent his whole life as a practical man, a rational man, a man with no patience for ghost stories or mythology. But he said this, whatever Richer saw or whatever the pilot saw and reported to him, it changed him. The man who left Hamburg in December 1938 was not the same man who walked down the gangplank in April 1939. He said, I watched the captain every day at sea. I had worked with him for years. I knew his face. And from the day we left Antarctica for the rest of the voyage home, he never once looked out at the ocean. Not at dawn, not at dusk, not when the other men stood at the rail to watch the whales. He always looked inward, away from the water, away from the direction we had come from, like a man who had seen something decided, very deliberately never to look at it again. We know what the history says. We know that 82 German soldiers, scientists, and officers sailed to Antarctica in the winter of 1938 on a mission to claim territory for whale oil. We know they flew over hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of uncharted ice and took 16,000 photographs. We know they found a place where ice gave way to bare earth and liquid water, a discovery so unexpected that the pilot named it after himself. We know they came home. We know that most of what they found was buried by war, by time, and by the deliberate suppression that governs all things in a police state. We know that the Nazi underground Antarctic fortress, Base 211, almost certainly does not exist, that the claims around it were built on rumor, fabrication, and compulsive human need to fill in blank spaces on maps with something darker than emptiness. And yet, Werner Fleischer died in Bremen in 1977, and the last coherent words on his tape were not about his family, or his God, or the years he had lived. They were about a captain who came back from the bottom of the world, unable to look at the ocean. Rudolf Meer flew over a valley in the wall of that massif and saw something in the ice that he couldn't explain, and never spoke of, and whose photographs disappeared before the war was over. An unnamed technician stood on a shelf of Antarctic ice at midnight and watched blue light pulse in the fog, and was told by a duty officer to forget he had ever seen it. And Captain Alfred Richer himself, that precise, careful, methodical man, sent a coded telegram to Berlin from the bottom of the world. A telegram about something the official record does not describe. A telegram that, if it ever existed in any archive, has never been found. Antarctica is the coldest, driest, most remote place on the surface of this earth. It has no permanent human population. Its interior remains, in meaningful ways, unmapped. Its ice holds within it records of everything the atmosphere of this planet has ever contained. Going back 800,000 years, it holds its own secrets very well. Whatever those 82 men found in the summer of 1939, whether it was something geological, something meteorological, something they misunderstood and could not name, it died with them, as most of the truth about that era has died. What remains are the gaps, the missing photographs, the separate catalog, the classified telegram, the captain who wouldn't look at the sea, and the question, standing like a cold wind at the edge of everything we know, what exactly were they trying so hard to forget? If you want to go deeper into the untold mysteries of World War II, the operations no textbook covers, the discoveries that official history left in the dark, subscribe now, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment with the one question this story left you asking. Because we are not done. We are never done.